Greetings, Starfighters. Here we are at the end of the season. Well, there's still the season wrap-up episode to do, but we are on our last movie, one that, based on the production company thing here, looks like we got another one that's at least somewhat related to New Moon Pictures and Charles Band. Not directed by Ted Nicolau, sadly, but then again, the one Ted Nicolau movie we did have was actually kind of boring, which is unfortunate. But The Secret Kingdom, which looks like, based on the little summary on the back here, it's probably just going to be a knockoff of the movie version of The Indian in the Cupboard, which, if I remember correctly, was a children's novel originally. I have not read that book, assuming I'm correct that it even exists. I've not seen that movie either. So, going into a ripoff without having seen the thing it's ripping off, I've done that kind of thing before, and it's always sort of an interesting experience because in a weird way you end up, I don't want to say liking the ripoff more, but it's just in your head, so that by the time you see the original, if you ever see the original, it just, you know consciously that it's the original, but it doesn't necessarily feel like it. But that's all really only going to matter if I ever actually see The Indian in the Cupboard. We're not talking about The Indian in the Cupboard, we are talking about The Secret Kingdom. And now I have watched The Secret Kingdom from 1998. Sorry, I just noticed that I had a typo and listed the year as 1989 on the document. Whoops. This movie is sometimes known as The Tiny Kingdom, as some of the posters you're going to see will show. Plot summary, courtesy of, Apple TV of all places. And this plot summary is actually inaccurate in a couple of ways, but I'll get to that. When a curious kid accidentally discovers the magnificent miniature city nestled behind the kitchen sink, his brother and his sister are transported into a strange land. Two kingdoms from another time and place are going to war, and it's up to the kids to restore peace among the people. Okay, whoever wrote this summary didn't actually watch the movie because it's one kingdom undergoing a rebellion, and I'm going to spoil this right now. One of the siblings doesn't get transported into the kingdom. Only two of them do. This summary implies all three of them. This is incorrect. Moving on. Google Images was not kind to me on this one, folks. I got so many images and posters from completely unrelated movies that don't have even remotely similar titles. Like, why did I get results for an Alan Ladd movie called Calcutta? I mean, the stuff that came from movies that also have the word secret in the title, I get why that happened, but Calcutta? Really? Alan Ladd you may recognize as the guy who somehow got top billing in Gangs Inc. back in season 3? No, not season 3. That was the vampire season. Season 5. Mob movies. It's hot, folks. Yeah, he got top billing in Gangs Inc. despite barely appearing in it at all until the second half of the movie. Anyway, all off topic. The movie itself gets a strike against it before we even get to the title, because the music reminds me way too much of the score that the Paul Matthews movies we had to suffer through for the first 70% of the season used. Our first scene has one of our main characters finding a little figure of what looks like a Confederate general on a horse, just on the ground while out walking with his drumsticks. As in, sticks for playing drums, he wasn't walking around with a piece of chicken in each hand. He has an encounter with one of those street performers who pretend to be statues, while a mysterious figure all dressed in black watches him from afar. The kid walks around looking at stuff. He does this for pretty much the entire length of the opening credits, which, to go back to the score, keeps switching back and forth between ominous and upbeat. And it doesn't always start being ominous or stop being upbeat when the mysterious figure following the kid shows up, which would make sense, so it ends up being distracting when it didn't have to be. The mysterious figure starts talking to the kid, and he turns out to be a lightning rod salesman, who is very pushy about the subject. So naturally, the kid runs away after calling the salesman crazy, and oh boy. I won't be too harsh. This kid is a teenager, if that old, and child actors are, as I've often said on this show, hit or miss. But if this is going to be one of our leads for the movie, we are in for a long one. No wonder the part of him running through the cemetery was in slow-mo. It was the only tool the filmmakers had to actually convey fear, because the actor certainly wasn't selling it. At least I thought it was slow-mo. Turns out the kid is just running slowly, so that the much older actor playing the lightning rod salesman can keep up with him while on foot. I get what they were going for here, but it just doesn't work. The menace that somehow manages to keep up with you no matter how fast you go and how slow it seems to be going is a time-honored staple of horror movies. But that only works when it isn't obvious that the actor is trying very hard not to go faster than whatever the camera operator is riding on. And no, the lightning rod guy showing up still on foot right outside the kid's house, despite the kid having caught public transit, doesn't redeem the whole sequence. By itself, it's actually fine, but in context, it had me going, whatever. We meet the other two main characters next, the younger brother and older sister of the kid who is being followed by the lightning rod salesman. And somehow it's the youngest of the three who, at least so far, is the better actor. Like I say, hit or miss. There's nothing that seems super important here, though I suppose the youngest, Zach, having a tendency to exaggerate, and the sister, Callie, being a procrastinator will be traits they'll have to overcome over the course of the story. Kinda. The other brother, the one with the drumsticks who was being shadowed, is named Mark. We get a kind of funny moment when Zach has snagged Callie's journal and asks Mark if he wants to read it with him, to which Mark goes, "No thanks, I like living." The line was well delivered. I laughed. So already this movie is better than your average Paul Matthews affair. Callie chases Zach through the house, their parents are out of town, as is often the case with movies such as this, and eventually gets her journal back and decides to retaliate by taking Zach's favorite toys. Which leads to the second laugh of the movie, with Zach going, "No, not Mr. Toad, no!" It's really in the delivery. She then proceeds to simply put them all in a trash can in the kitchen, which Zach somehow fails to see until he gets up in the middle of the night to get a snack from the fridge. During that part, we see the lightning rod salesman outside, and he's set up a rod on the fence outside the house, and a thunderstorm has started. Upon recovering his intercom set, it's a walkie-talkie, but the movie calls it an intercom set for some reason, Zach hears someone calling out over it from the Kingdom of Relkin, and our plot is well underway now. Zach has a pretty normal reaction to the things he's hearing from the other end of the radio, actually. He's not mean about it, but he makes no effort to hide his skepticism, until he drops his radio by accident while checking out a noise in the cabinet under the kitchen and manages to see, well, the tiny kingdom under the sink. Mark comes in and sees the kingdom fairly quickly before Zach even really has a chance to mention it, so we avoid the standard "how come you don't believe me" argument we usually get in movies like this that are never particularly fun, even in good movies. So I appreciate this movie for skipping over that, or at least skipping over it for Mark. We'll see what happens when Zach has to tell Callie about this. Speaking of, when the guy on the other end of the radio, Engineer Chartwell, activates a device to bring Zach into the kingdom, he snags Mark instead in a... it was a pretty good effect, especially for the late 90s. I can't say I'm loving this movie so far, but I'm not hating it. Zach naturally freaks out, runs to his room, and hides under his bed. Honestly, probably a normal reaction under the circumstances. When Mark materializes in Chartwell's lab, Chartwell is already gone, but the lab is being searched by soldiers who are all but explicitly stated to be the bad guys. They are wearing gray uniforms and brandishing muskets, so, oh man, can you imagine the Fox News freakout if this movie came out today? So Mark, through luck more than anything else, avoids being seen by the soldiers. He wanders around a bit and eventually runs into a jump scare of a guy with no eyes. Once that guy is gone, Mark gets out of the lab and walks around looking for someone who can possibly help him, but only encounters more people with no eyes, who blow whistles and point at him a la Donald Sutherland in Invasion of the Body Snatchers. Now, I want to point out something really good about this sequence. In the establishing shot before Mark approaches the woman who turns out to have no eyes and blows a whistle at him, the camera is angled so we can get a clear look at the sky over the buildings. The pitch black sky. No stars. This fits with something Chartwell told Zach over the radio about how words like sun and rain are old words, all but lost to history. This is effective world building, and I dig it. Says a lot without saying anything. No, wait. That generally when someone uses the term says a lot without saying anything, they mean it as an insult. Show don't tell. Show don't tell, that's what I meant to say. Mark is eventually captured by soldiers, one of who just has Nazi scientist typewritten all over him, and the effectiveness of the scene is unfortunately broken by Mark's actor very badly delivering, word for word, the iconic line from the movie The Elephant Man, "I am not an animal, I'm a human being." Well, it was nice while it lasted. Speaking of nice while it lasted, remember when I mentioned the world building earlier with the dark sky? Yeah, later on when we see Mark being taken from a cell to an interrogation room, he's taken across a courtyard in broad daylight. Now, there's probably some magical explanation for how it can look like this with no sun, but the way it presents in the movie is jarring. Had there been a hint of this earlier, I could roll with it, no problem. This is a fantasy movie geared towards children. I did not come into this expecting realism, but suspension of disbelief can only be stretched so far. Anyway, the interrogator enters the room through a door with the words Ministry of Perfection over it, and this guy... This guy looks like a ginger Victorian Commander Riker. That's like the only thing I can think of to describe this. He's the only one of the bad guys to talk like a regular human so far, so I think we've found our main villain for the piece. He questions Mark about how he got there, but Mark genuinely has no idea and says he just wants to go home. The as-yet unnamed antagonist says it's forbidden, blasphemy even, to discuss the world Mark comes from. He takes a walk with Mark and tells him that it is a matter of faith that there is nothing beyond the edge except death, and that there is nothing but Relkin. The way he talks about it with Mark implies that he doesn't necessarily believe in this himself, or at least not very strongly, but that it matters that the idea be maintained. I like what the movie seems to be going for here, but I'm not going to lie. As I'm watching and typing all of this, I am not confident it's going to be able to pull it off. It's certainly not a shock to anyone who knows me that I would very much approve of a story where the message is, or at least as of 28 minutes and 22 seconds in, seems to be, about elites using religious doctrine to control the masses. I'm just not confident this movie is going to pull it off. Especially with the weakest of the younger actors being, sadly, the main character. The villain, still unnamed, but he refers to himself as a regent, tells Mark to sign a document saying that he was raised in secret by Chartwell and there is no outside world and he'll be sent home. Mark falls for it, proving his name is quite literal in this movie, and is actually shocked when the bad guy goes, and by home I mean the state orphanage, since you're a parentless child in Relkin. Sucks to be you, bruh. Not a direct quote, obviously. And I've taken a moment to go look it up, and yeah, the bad guy is just listed as the Regent in the credits. I can roll with it. Moving on, we get a pretty decent villain monologue here that is capped off with a really lame scream of what I assume was supposed to be terror from Mark as he's dragged away by the guards. If a better child actor were in this role, I know I'd be liking this movie more right now. But his weak delivery of more than half of his lines just keeps yanking me right out of it. We go back to the house in New Orleans that is not called the Rising Sun. It just occurs to me that joke would have worked better had I mentioned earlier that Mark, Zach, and Callie all live in New Orleans. Anyway, Zach asks Callie if she's seen Mark. While he did witness Mark being grabbed by the purple energy ball, he's probably started thinking he might have imagined it, though he's clearly worried about his brother. He doesn't tell Callie about the light or the radio or anything, he just walks away when she says she hasn't seen him. And then we go right back to Relkin. So apart from reestablishing that Zach is probably the best actor in the movie, that sequence appears to have been pointless. We get some stuff with an evil doctor whose menace is undermined by goofy clown music, which isn't too shocking considering this whole movie it's been 50-50 as to whether the score fits the scene well or not. The horror of what goes on in this facility, that people are surgically altered against their will to be better fits for jobs that were chosen for them, and basically lobotomized so they'll think they're happy, is not sold as effectively as it could be, I think. Also, as an aside, don't let any conservatives watch this movie, it'll give them ideas. But I do say not as effectively as opposed to not at all. I mean, there's some good stuff here. Thankfully, Mark is rescued by an undercover Chartwell and his female assistant who hasn't been given a name yet, hence why this is my first time mentioning her, although it's really the second time we've seen her. She's not had much to do so far, so her not having a name yet isn't really annoying like it was so often in the Paul Matthews movies we talked about this season. Still would be nice to have it, but Once I do have it, I'll share it with you. Mark almost blows the rescue by saying the name of his rescuer, who is a wanted rebel, using his outdoor voice in a hospital. If he'd gotten caught, the little shit would have had it coming. As part of the escape, they cause an explosion that manages to not kill anyone, because this movie is rated PG. Still no explanation for the light at this point, and the presence of obvious sunbeams as Chartwell, Mark, and the young woman moving through the forest towards a rebel hideout doesn't help. Again, this is a world where people under a certain age have apparently never even heard the word sun before. And the longer this movie takes place in broad daylight, the more confused I get. It doesn't have to be a scientifically plausible explanation. I'm already going along with the whole ass kingdom under a kitchen sink thing. I just need something. As they are hunted by the Regent and some of his soldiers, we get a very effective bit of body horror here, as the dog barking noises we've been hearing the past minute or so, well, they didn't come from a dog. Remember that surgery stuff I was talking about earlier? Editor, assuming it's not next in line already, would you be so kind as to put image 19 up on screen? Thank you. Yeah, this is some David Cronenberg shit here, and I mean that as a compliment. Really serves to add to the threat the villain presents. And the makeup is good too. I can see why Mill Creek actually chose this very shot as the preview image on the back of the DVD. So we're about halfway through at this point, and despite what the plot summary said, Zach and Callie have not been transported yet. In fact, the latter is blissfully unaware that anything is happening. Did the plot summary lie to me? Should I stop doing that thing where I copy and paste the summary before I watch the movie? Do we have a release date yet for the rest of Season 1 of Star Trek Prodigy? Am I going off on a tangent? Anyway, Mark, Chartwell, and the still unnamed woman make it to the lake they were heading for after being rescued at the last minute by a group of armed rebels who managed to drive off the Regent and his soldiers. Chartwell takes Mark to a room full of books with what he calls forbidden knowledge, and it's here I must admit to having read the situation wrong. There actually is a sun in Relkin, they just don't call it that. Or rather, are not allowed to. So that's one question I had answered, and I admit my assumptions about the presence of daylight and sunbeams being a problem with the film were wrong. However, Chartwell mentions stars. So where were they during the portion of the movie that took place at night in Relkin? I don't think you can blame light pollution for that. As I mentioned earlier, the establishing shot was aimed towards the sky. The lack of stars, at least to my mind, was clearly deliberate to show the difference between this place and, quote-unquote, our world. I'm honestly still as confused as I was before this scene, just in a different way now. So Chartwell asks Mark for help in liberating Relkin, and Mark has a perfectly reasonable reaction. He says no way. And he isn't particularly nasty about it either. It's honestly the most human he's seemed all movie. He has been through a lot. The last guy who asked a lot of him just flat out lied, and he's a teenager being asked to take part in a rebellion against a tyrannical regime. Can you really blame him for wanting to nope out here? At this point, we cut back to Mark's home, and the lightning rod salesman is still standing outside, and Callie is on the phone with someone who she thinks might have seen Mark. So she's finally noticed he's gone missing, but Zach still hasn't told her about the kitchen sink kingdom. Fair enough, given their, to put it gently, contentious sibling relationship. After getting off the phone, she grabs Zach while he's in the kitchen and insists that he knows where Mark is and to spill, or else she'll make sure he suffers any consequences she suffers from their parents if Mark is still gone when they get home. Zach blurts out about the kitchen sink kingdom in a panic, which is probably why it takes Callie several seconds to process what he said, and also why she went to being confused as opposed to going to thinking he was making it all up. We cut back to the Regent, now at Chartwell's lab from the beginning of the movie, and the dogma he forces on his subjects backfires a little bit, as no one can give him a report on what they think Chartwell's machine can do without using blasphemous language, which leads to them just basically saying nothing while looking like they're about to wet themselves. Luckily for the Regent, but unluckily for Zach and Callie, he's able to work out what the machine does. Callie opens the cabinet under the sink, and the kingdom under there is even easier to see now than it was before, when Zach had to accidentally knock over a few cleaning product containers. She's stunned, but accepts it, and listens as the Regent broadcasts, pretending to be Chartwell, over the other part of the intercom set, with Zach seated right next to her on the kitchen floor. The Regent drops the pretense and has the machine turned back on, and Callie is nabbed by a purple ball of light, same as Mark. Zach has, once again, a perfectly normal response for his kid his age and runs away. I'll just go ahead and say this right now. Zach never gets to Relkin, so that's the other way. The plot summary is wrong. And then we get an ominous shot of the lightning rod salesman again. I've honestly been going back and forth on whose side he's supposed to be on. We go to the outside of the lab after Callie faints, and the Regent orders her taken to the palace, and we see Mark, Chartwell, and name to be announced in disguise outside, clearly looking for a way in. So, despite what I'm sure was palpable disappointment, Chartwell is intending to help Mark get home instead of pushing him to join the rebellion. Good for him. Mark sees his sister being carried away, however, so as you probably expected, he's not interested in simply fleeing anymore. The Regent gets Callie to sign a document, much the same way that he did with Mark. The still unnamed assistant, I swear I am this close to just going to the IMDb page, asks if it's a pattern in Mark's family to agree to sign false confessions, and he comes back with a well-deserved, if stiltedly delivered, comeback. He promised to send me home, he didn't. You promised to send me home, you haven't. Is there a pattern in your kingdom? Damn, dude, right for the jugular. I appreciate it. And at 54 minutes in, we finally get a name for Chartwell's assistant. Catherine. She also gets more dialogue here than in the rest of the movie, and, Okay, she's still a better actor than the kid playing Mark for the most part, but her inspiring speech makes Mike Dukakis look like FDR in terms of charisma. However, this is a fantasy movie, so it works, and the rebels are roused to mount a rescue of Callie and to send her and Mark home. Meanwhile, Zach has set up a platoon worth of plastic army men in the kitchen. This had honestly better pay off, or I'm going to dock the movie several points. And it doesn't pay off. Footage of the toys intercuts with footage of the actual battle between the rebels and the Regent's men outside Chartwell's lab. Dang. I had honestly started to expect better from this movie. But Zach at least does play a role in the climax eventually with... You know what, I'll just let the screen cap speak for itself. It's labeled Peach Can in the image folder, and there you go. Yeah, look at that. Just bask in the glory. This is how the kids are able to demolish the Regent's dogma that there is nothing outside Relkin, and I have to say, within the context of the story, it's actually pretty clever. I like this ending. The regent surrenders, Chartwell is temporarily placed in charge, and he decides to convert the kingdom into a republic. Mark and Callie get returned home. Relkin gets sent back to its world in a sequence I don't know if I can adequately explain, and yeah, apparently somehow Relkin got separated from the world it was a part of, and that's how it ended up behind the sink. The lightning rod salesman disappears into thin air after putting the little figurine Mark had seen at the start of the movie on a windowsill, so I'm guessing he was working with the good guys somehow. I don't know. And the final scene is people in Relkin seeing a rainbow for the first time. The end. Random thoughts I had while watching the movie. If I had to describe the Kingdom of Relkin's aesthetic in one sentence, it would be 1984 by way of Jane Austen. I actually didn't notice it until the movie was about half over, but Chartwell's accent is about as consistent as Kevin Costner's was in Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves. And that back and forth accent is still the butt of jokes more than 20 years later. Some people might call it on the nose, but I actually appreciated the look that they went for the uniforms of the villains' soldiers. They are very Nazi in style, but Confederacy in color scheme. It's not subtle, but subtlety is a tool like any other in filmmaking. You don't have to use it all the time. So they don't know what the sun is called, or what rain and snow are, but somehow the Regent's chief constable knows what a Native American is off the top of his head. What? Chartwell's right. The Republic of Relkin does have a nice ring to it. Callie deciding to start being nicer to her brothers happens awfully fast towards the end there. I feel like they could have spent a little bit more time getting to that, and the last movie was 90 minutes that hardly did anything. This is 82 minutes and has a lot more. Sorry, you won't pick up on it because I will edit it all out, but some really loud noises from outside just completely threw me off. If they'd made this movie 90 minutes instead of the last one, it could have worked, because they could have spent much, if not all, of that 8 minutes having on like character development for Callie, so that at the end when she decides to be nicer to her brothers, it makes more sense. Because, 8 minutes might not seem like that much on its face, but something to keep in mind. A lot can happen in a movie in 8 minutes. Think Star Trek III, Search for Spock. The time from when they get on the Enterprise after they decided to steal it to after Scotty explains how he sabotaged the Excelsior, there's quite a bit of character stuff in there, and some action, and some great music, and all of that, that's less than 8 minutes. That's closer to like, let me look that up real quick. Yeah, that's only a little over 6 minutes, actually. So yeah, they could have totally given Callie more to do. But what's done is done. This movie's like almost 25 years old at this point, so yeah. Final verdict. I feel like the biggest thing this movie needed to be a much better remembered children's movie is a better actor playing Mark. That, a more consistent score, and a little bit more character stuff for Callie, although I think that one's actually probably the least important of the three, if I'm being brutally honest here. This is all in contrast to most of the other movies in this set, where you'd need to fix like a half dozen things for the movie to have even half a chance. And other movies were just kind of fucked from the word go. But with regards to the Secret Kingdom, the parts that do work really work. It does a surprisingly good job at having body horror while still being something most kids over the age of 4 can watch without being completely traumatized. Well, I'm guessing about age 4, maybe 5 or 6 would be more appropriate. I don't have kids, I don't know. I'm not even an uncle. I'm going to go ahead and recommend this movie to people. Just steel yourself for how bad the lead actor is, even when playing against actors almost half his age. Who knows, maybe my show will help this movie get some recognition, because honestly I feel like its score on Letterboxd is a little low. I've seen much worse movies with higher rankings, that's all I'm saying. So tune in next month when we do the season wrap-up episode where we will announce the set that has been chosen for Season 8. Have fun, stay safe.